Many of us have grown used to conflict in the Middle East, but events of the past fortnight feel more threatening than ever. People are scared, and not just those living in Israel and Gaza. Protests are growing louder around the world. The attack on a Gaza hospital, both sides blaming each other, providing ammunition to inflame an already explosive situation. So is this another flare-up in the Middle East, or is the conflict spreading? Former Ambassador to Israel, Dave Sharma, spent years working in the Middle East and joins me now. Dave, the pictures are scary and I think people are feeling really unsettled. It's hard to see how this de-escalates quickly.
I think it could be quite a difficult period ahead. I think there is a very real prospect that this doesn't stay a local and painful and awful war, but can spread into something much more dangerous and engulfing the whole region.
Well, let's just take a look at the map then, and we'll zone into the actual conflict zone. So here you have in yellow, this is Israel, that's the West Bank, and right here is the Gaza Strip. All borders to the Gaza Strip are closed off, including the one to Egypt. So if we talk about the immediate neighbours, let's start with Egypt and Jordan. They'd be feeling pretty nervous right about now.
They are feeling nervous. They're nervous for a number of reasons. Firstly, for Egypt, they share a border with Gaza. They'll be concerned about a humanitarian outflow, refugees streaming into Egypt. And for Jordan, they have their own population which feels a lot of affinity for the Gazan Palestinians, and they will be concerned about protests, uprising and potentially even terrorism picking up in Jordan because of what's happening in Gaza.
OK, and then you've got a different story here. This is the northern border to Israel, and you've got Lebanon. That is a whole different story, isn't it?
That is a real flashpoint here. You've got a militia terrorist group called Hezbollah, which has largely been funded, trained and armed by Iran, sitting in almost the entirety of the south of Lebanon. They have 10 times as many rockets as Hamas does in Gaza. They have 10 times as many fighters. They've got precision-guided munitions. They've got a pretty sophisticated arsenal for something that's not a state army. They're almost like a country's army. If they decide to open up a front with Israel, if they decide to attack Israel, that makes the situation a whole lot more complicated and difficult. OK, let's talk a little bit broader, and one of the key players in the Middle East is the Iran in this, and it was said to give the green light to Hamas to attack. It's been very clear if Israeli troops march into Gaza, that is a red line for them. It has communicated that directly, I think, to the UN to pass that message to Israel and to the United States. Now, Iran, as you can see here, it basically, through its proxies and allies, controls a whole land corridor to the south of Lebanon, through Iraq, where Shia militia, Iranian-aligned Shia militia, are dominant, to Syria, where Iranian ground forces and troops have basically propped up Bashar al-Assad, and then into Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So Iran has a lot of tentacles in the region and has an ability to project power and threaten Israel, even though it's quite a distance away because of groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. OK,
so it's got that corridor sort of right through here. If you go down then to Saudi Arabia, because this is pretty interesting, one of the world's largest oil producers, but it came very close to signing a deal with Israel that would have strengthened ties.
It did. I mean, the US has been sponsoring talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia now for several months, and the idea would be Saudi Arabia would recognise Israel, which has never done before. They would open diplomatic relations, they would open trade and commercial relations, and that would be a huge realignment in the Middle East. These countries that have historically been in conflict with Israel would suddenly be partners, and Iran has felt very threatened by that because this would change the dynamic of the region in a way to their disadvantage. And I think it's a very good working theory that the reason these attacks happened, the reason Iran supported them going ahead, was to scupper this Israel-Saudi agreement.
You've also got to think, though, that if this does all blow up, what happens to oil prices when there is so much instability in the region?
Well, I think oil prices will probably get quite volatile. You're not seeing energy markets price this in yet, this risk, but Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil producer, of course. Iran is a significant oil producer as well, but Iran has the capability, and it's done it in the past, to attack Saudi oil infrastructure, to block the Straits of Hormuz, which are here, which would send oil prices sky high and mean higher petrol prices at the pump for us here. OK, so let's now spin the globe a little. If we go over to the US, and Israel has the might of the US military. They do. They've had very strong diplomatic, political and military support from the United States. President Joe Biden was just in Israel I think it's the first time a US president has visited Israel during a time of conflict. And the US has also sent 2 aircraft carrier battle groups to the eastern Mediterranean, basically to sit off the shores of Israel and Lebanon and to try and deter and discourage groups like Hezbollah, countries like Iran, from trying to take advantage of the situation.
So if the US gets involved, what does that mean for allies like us, you know, the UK, France, Germany? Are we then potentially dragged into this?
I think we would be. And I think the United Kingdom is already sending military assistance to Israel. In times past, we've certainly joined US naval task forces and combined operations groups in the Middle East to help stabilise that theatre. We've got the assets that can do it. We've got surveillance aircraft. We've got ships. And if there is a longer-term role for the Allies or the Western countries, at least, to help calm down this conflict, I think it's important that Australia puts itself forward.
OK, one country probably not too upset at what we're seeing at the moment in the Middle East would be Russia, because it takes focus away from the invasion of Ukraine. But I want to get your thoughts on just south of Russia, because we have China. Would it potentially take advantage of the world's attention and military resources being over in the Middle East to say, hello, Taiwan?
That is a risk. I think history tells us that particularly countries like China and Russia take advantages of times when the international community is distracted or focused on another conflict to entrench their own interests or to pursue their own interests. Now, I think Taiwan is certainly a potential flashpoint. I do believe China wants to reunify with Taiwan by force, if must be. But that said, whether they choose this opportunity now, I'm not sure, but I think it certainly raises the stakes.
I'll tell you what, Australia feels so far away most of the time, but it's incredible how fear travels. Hopefully it settles down soon, but really appreciate your time, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali.